Our reading is from Isaiah chapter 53, from verses 4 to 9. And if you'd like to follow it in the church Bibles, you'll find it on page 741. So that's Isaiah chapter 53, starting at verse 4. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering. Yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away, yet who of his generation protested? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was punished. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Thank you very much, Alan. Does anybody like getting a birthday card? Yeah? Do you like getting a birthday card? Especially if it's your birthday? If it's not your birthday, bit worrying. I love getting a birthday card. My gran, I remember when my gran was 90, she had so many birthday cards, she ran out of space on the mantelpiece. In fact, my gran used to get more birthday cards than I ever got because she was far more popular than me. I know. It's nice to be remembered, though, isn't it? When it's our birthday, it's nice to get a card from people, especially the people we weren't expecting to get a card from, because it shows us that they remembered. And we then realize that they remembered because we're important to them. They love us. When we have something big coming up, maybe something important going on at school or at work, or maybe we have an anniversary, or maybe we have a medical appointment, it matters to us, doesn't it, when somebody asks us how it went? Because we know that they're asking because we're important to them, because they love us. We've been remembered because we are important to someone. Remembering really matters, doesn't it? Which is, of course, why today, Remembrance Day, matters. Because remembering is important. Remembering the sacrifices that other people made to keep us safe. And of course, we're especially remembering those 2 world wars, aren't we? But we're also remembering wars before that and since. We're also remembering people who are still sacrificing and serving their country to keep us and to keep other people safe. And we also, of course, remember people who are the victims of war, people whose lives have been turned completely upside down through no fault of their own, other than they just happen to be living somewhere where a fight is going on. Remembering really matters. You might not have realized it, but that reading we just had from Alan, he was reading from Isaiah chapter 53 in the Bible. That is all about remembering. It's all about God remembering. Isn't that great? People remember because we matter to them. God remembers because we matter to God. Now, Isaiah, whose words we heard, he lived about 700 years before Jesus was born. Now, Jesus was born about 2,000 years ago, so who's good at maths? That's about 2,700 and something years ago, isn't it? That was a time when lots of people thought that God had forgotten them. Everything had seemed to be going so well for so long. God had called this special group of people to be his special friends, people who would know God, people who would take God's love to the world around them, people who would bring God's blessing to the whole world. And for a while that seemed to be going well, but then it all started to go wrong, because the two countries either side of these special people who knew God, they turned into bullies. That's not very nice, is it? They turned into bullies, and they came and kicked out these special friends of God from the country that they were living in, their own country. And they made them live miles away from home. And this went on for years. And if you were living in the middle of all of that, it would be very easy, wouldn't it, to think that God had forgotten you. Maybe the people Isaiah was speaking to felt a little bit like people from Ukraine a few years ago who had to go and live in a completely different place, miles from home, to stay safe. Or maybe they felt a little bit like people in this country in the Second World War, when Liverpool and London and our major cities were being blitzed by bombs and people didn't know quite how things were going to end. It would have been very easy for those people in those situations to have given up hope, wouldn't it? But God's message through Isaiah to this particular group of people living in the middle of a nightmare was that God had not forgotten them. One day they would get back home and God would take them there. And I'm sure that the people that Isaiah was speaking to had all kinds of ideas about how they wanted God to do that. I'm sure they had ideas about a kind of superhero military leader who would come and blast their enemies out of the way and take them back home. But God's message through Isaiah was different, because the real problem wasn't just that the countries next door were bullies. The real problem was that these people who were supposed to be God's special friends had stopped listening to God. They'd ended up being no better than anybody else. They were no kinder than people who didn't know God. They were no fairer than the people who had never even heard of God. The real problem wasn't the bullies next door. The real problem was that these people who were supposed to be God's friends had let God down, and they needed to find their way back to God. And that is where our reading that Alan brought us came in, because God knew what his people really needed. And he knew that wasn't an army. He knew that what they really needed was to be friends with God again. And God, through Isaiah, said that the way that this was going to happen was going to be through a whole new kind of leader that had never been seen before. Not a leader who won by force, but a leader who would be a servant of everyone else. A leader who, even though they'd done nothing wrong himself, would take on himself all the mistakes of everyone else, offering them a restart with God. Isn't that amazing? And that is what our reading was all about. It said, a bit in the middle, surely he, this new kind of a leader, took on our pain and bore or carried our sufferings. He was pierced for our transgressions, for the things we've done wrong. He was crushed for our iniquities, the ways we've let God down. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. At the time of Isaiah, people probably struggled to get their heads around what all that meant. But 700-ish years later, as people looked back on the life of Jesus, they had a bit of a light bulb moment, because they realized that this person that Isaiah had been talking about all those years before was Jesus. Jesus, who had done nothing wrong, but gave himself for us on the cross, offering to take on himself our pain and our suffering, because he chose to take on himself all of our wrong choices, our wrong thoughts, our wrong decisions, our wrong actions, all of our sin. And that is where Jesus offers something that no other sacrifice has ever been able to offer before or since. Because Jesus didn't just end an argument over who was in charge of a country. He didn't just end an argument over who owns a bit of land or who's allowed to fish or farm or mine somewhere. Jesus, who rose from the dead and is alive and with us today, he offers to change us from the inside out, to forgive us for all the times when we have messed up, and then to work in us to change us so that we become more like Jesus. And as we do that, we will become less selfish, and we will cause less arguments, and we will start less wars. And that's not just something that people around Isaiah needed to hear 2,700 years ago. It's not just something that people around Jesus needed to hear 2,000 years ago. It's something we all still need to hear, and not just hear, but it's something that Jesus offers us as a gift to accept. The gift of being forgiven, the gift of having a restart with God, the gift of having Jesus being at work in us to change us to be more like Jesus and to change us to be more like the people God designed and planned us to be. So as we remember today, let's also remember that God remembers us and longs for us to come back to him. Before we come to our final hymn, let's just take a moment to pause and pray. As we remember today on Remembrance Sunday, we thank you, God, that you remember us. We thank you that in Jesus you offer to take away all of our failures and our mess-ups and our mistakes. And we thank you that you offer to give us a whole new start with you. And maybe that's a new start with you that we need to accept as your gift today, maybe for the first time, or maybe in a way that is new to us today as we understand it or remember it in a new way.